Hello, everyone. We welcome you to this session. We are about to begin. We have some people coming into the space, and so we'll wait for just a moment as the participants enter into the session. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to offer a warm welcome to all of our guests, speakers, and participants today, and to those of you who are viewing and joining this session from all over the world. My name is Melissa Alvarado. I'm the regional lead for ending violence against women at UN Women's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. It's a great pleasure to moderate today's event, World Design Talks. Design Against Gender-Based Violence, brought to you by the World Design Organization and UN Women in Asia and the Pacific. We are hosting this event as part of the United Nations Secretary General's Unite campaign to eliminate violence against women, which has called on all of us to think creatively, to test new solutions to end violence against women and girls. We will all remember 2020 for its uncertainty, its lessons, for the remarkable increase in domestic violence globally, called by some a pandemic within a pandemic. Even before COVID-19, home was not a safe place for many women and children, with 1 in 3 women globally experience violence during their lifetime. As billions have retreated indoors due to lockdown measures, we saw an alarming increase of violence. The United Nations Secretary General has called for urgent and accelerated global action to end violence against women in the era of COVID-19 by leaders and influencers extending beyond government and civil society to the private sector, media and entertainment, faith leaders, young people, and many more. It is clear that the extent of this problem requires everyone. 2020 encouraged us to find new solutions to solve these very real challenges. For UN Women, we have met extraordinary people seeking similar solutions: designers, innovators, researchers, psychologists, activists, through and in partnership with the World Design Organization. UN Women, in cooperation with the World Design Organization, met virtually to collaborate on preventing violence against women and girls in the region through the lens of design by identifying human-centered, solution-based initiatives. The first phase was the Generation Equality Asia-Pacific Design Challenge that we held in August of this year. During the course of 2 weeks, more than 100 participants from 29 countries worked tirelessly to produce an array of inspired and thoughtful solutions to address violence against women and girls. Today, we're hosting a virtual World Design Talks to stimulate an open dialogue around the value of human-centered design on the issue of ending violence against women and girls, showcasing the work being done around the world by designers, activists, and innovators. We are inviting participants from this challenge to share their experiences bridging the work of designers and subject matter experts in the field of ending violence against women, along with others who have taken such approaches and have stories to tell. Over the next 90 minutes, we will explore the topic of design against violence against women and talk with a variety of experts in the field of design, education, and research to highlight the role of design thinking in ending violence against women and girls. I want to note that during this session, we will invite participants to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen to share any comments or questions you have. And we hope to have space at the end of the session to present some of your questions or comments and have some responses from the speakers today to you. So I would like to next open today's event by inviting our first speaker, Weni Kusuma. Weni is the country representative of UN Women in Nepal and has been there since 2016. She has more than 30 years of experience in the field of women's human rights and gender equality. Welcome, Weni.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining our event tonight to mark the 16 Days of Activism to end violence against women. Our relationship with the World Design Organization has taken on genuine, heartfelt, and deep meaning of partnership for UN women. Hatched in a pandemic year when we have been forced to stay apart, this partnership has been a vehicle to bring us together. As we began this year, mostly as new acquaintances, we brought with us an initial skepticism. From UN Women's perspective, we asked, what is it that design can offer on the imperative of ending violence against women? More than this, if prevention is our ultimate aim, as it is, where we must stop violence before it starts, the question has always been, how do we address the invisible? By invisible, I mean those attitudes and beliefs that are not tangible and that place lesser value on women and girls and on other genders than men and boys. The invisible dimensions of our culture and norms that form the basis of our everyday decisions. Before encountering WDO, for me personally, design was about the application of art to utility. And I could not see personally beyond the material products around me to imagine the potential that designers could bring to the challenge that we live and breathe in UN Women. And that is, how do we bring about change that surfaces the invisible to reshape it into life-caring and not life-taking expressions? So much have we learned in this past year. Oftentimes we are asked, how does change happen? In fact, without knowing it, this past summer, we lived a case study of change. I readily admit by the end of August, when the first phase of our design challenge closed, we were surprised by just how much we were touched, each of us. The depth of what we saw in ourselves and each other. Change on the level of knowledge you would expect. Change on the level of skills. This was true too for a good number of participants. But change on the level of the invisible. Now that was a surprise. Our attitudes, our openness to the new subject matter that each of us offered, the new tools which challenged our ways of communicating, of working with each other. This was a surprise. We put a lot of people, as Melissa said, about 100 people from 29 countries through a very intensive process. We asked them to work around the clock 24/7 for 2 weeks straight in small teams to come up with the ideas. They came up with amazing sets of ideas on how to end violence against women and girls. They took on topics in doing so like male entitlement and challenging social norms. Tonight, you will hear more about this. My sister Achin sometimes reminds me, if you can imagine something, you can create it. Well, this is exactly what we are called upon to do, to innovate. This is what the partnership with WDO is offering us, new means and tools with which to imagine and innovate. And as we have imagined together in this phase 1, I believe we can and must now co-create that future of change we seek. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Weni, for these warm words of welcome for the participants in today's event. It is now my pleasure to introduce Srinivasan, the president of World Design Organization. Srini is also the chairman and CEO of Lumium Design, a Silicon Valley-based award-winning product design company. Srini was instrumental in leading the design challenge. Welcome, Srini.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'm going to share my screen. Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who have joined us here today. On behalf of the World Design Organization, I extend a warm welcome to all of you. It has indeed been a remarkable experience and a great honor for the WDO to collaborate on this initiative with UN Women in an attempt not only to work together to identify design solutions to support the prevention of violence against women and girls, but also to help shed light on such an important issue that still affects far too many around the globe. Next slide, please. Briefly, WDO is a global community that promotes a spirit of open collaboration to advance and facilitate innovative design-led solutions that has the power to contribute to creating a better world. As the voice of the industrial design for more than 60 years, our network comprised of key design stakeholders from academia, professional and promotional institutions, as well as private and public sectors from across 40 countries in all regions of the world. We have a unique opportunity to take action on the issues that matter at the global level. As an international organization with the UN consultative status since 1974, we work collectively to transform design practices within industrialized countries, as well as to encourage the use of design as a tool in emerging economies across all sectors of industry, as well as in all the levels of the governments. The next slide. Unlike the popular belief, as we heard from many earlier, design is not purely about aesthetics or just about creating products or objects. Design is a process, and in fact, to be more specific, design is a strategic problem-solving process that harnesses creativity and innovation to bridge the gap between what is and what is possible. As designers, our goal is to deliver a more optimistic way of looking at the future by reframing problems as opportunities. Today, more than ever, we believe in the intrinsic impact of design and its role in addressing social issues, and we are passionate about positioning design as an agent for positive change. These are examples of what design has done for communities around the globe in the last few years. Together, WDO and UN Women shared a common vision to apply a human-centered design thinking approach to address the issue of violence against women. The next slide, please. Our journey began earlier this year, as Melissa mentioned, as the two organizations set out to create a global mobilization of design professionals in an effort to brainstorm, research, and ideate innovations, solutions to the egregious reality of violence against women and girls. In light of the global pandemic, we quickly reframed our activities and launched Generation Equality Asia Pacific Design Challenge in August of this year, where 112 participants from 29 countries gathered virtually to form 6 teams, and that worked over a course of 2 weeks. During our initial audit and planning sessions earlier this year, we had identified more than 120 challenges statements, which were then clustered by theme and potential impact. Common themes included communications and outreach, education, as well as policy and legislations. Ultimately, we narrowed this down to and challenged our participants to consider how we as a global community could identify more effective engagement to reduce and prevent violence against women that promotes behavioral change. 6 key focus areas were identified, and our participants set out in a virtual workshop to work on enlisting community leaders and influencers, leveraging media to challenge stereotypes, moving people emotionally and empathically to act, transforming men's sense of entitlement, changing the mindset that violence against women is normal, and influencing parents to raise children to reject harmful gender stereotypes and violence. The design challenge process was all done online over a period of 2 weeks, and we used digital whiteboarding techniques first time for us at the WDO and also for a lot of participants to discuss, debate, and arrive at a wonderful set of solutions. By the end of 2 weeks, we had more than 25 potential and possible solutions that can create an impact for the violence against women. So currently, we are evaluating along with the UN Women and WDO teams to see which of those could become a reality in terms of implementing within our society. So please look out for this, and thank you for listening to this, and hopefully you will enjoy the rest of the day as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Srini, for this introduction and giving an overview to the audience and participants today. Indeed, we know that design's role in addressing issues such as violence against women could be enormous. And as development professionals, we are learning so much from the design process and collaboration with you. I'm now pleased to invite my colleagues from the development sector, who we work closely with on a regular basis and who were part of this design challenge alongside us. So I'm gonna ask Lindsay McLean, co-founder and senior associate of the Prevention Collaborative, which is a collaborative of academics, practitioners, researchers who focus on ending violence against women and really, evidence to prevent violence. She was a key resource person for the Generation Equality Design Challenge and supported the process as a thought leader and a team facilitator. I'd also like to welcome my colleague Aijamal Duishabayeva, Partnerships Development Coordinator from UN Women's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, who was also one of our facilitators during the design challenge. So Lindsay and Aijamal, we invite you to share why there was this focus on prevention of violence against women, why this is important, and what the development sector can learn from this human-centered design approach. So over to you, thank you.
Thanks very much, Melissa. Good day and good evening to everybody. So with Aijamal, we're just going to say a few words about, from our perspective, about this design challenge focus on preventing violence against women. So firstly, I just wanted to say why we focused on prevention. So just a reminder for the audience, prevention is not the same as response. So when we're responding to violence, the violence has already occurred and we're responding to the needs of survivors to ensure their well-being. But prevention is actually stopping violence before it starts. So it's really about going upstream and addressing the root causes of violence. And why is this important? Why should we focus on prevention? So firstly, it's because the rates of violence across the world are very high. There's the graphic on the right-hand side there gives the statistic that 1 in 3 women globally have experienced physical or sexual intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And of course, there are many other forms of violence against women as well, such as harassment in public spaces, female genital mutilation, for example. Secondly, because the consequences of violence are very severe for women themselves, also for their children as the next generation who witness violence, and also for their families and communities. And thirdly, we have to remember that only a very small minority of women across the world actually seek help. So when they suffer violence, a very, very small percentage of women actually go and seek help. So if we just focus on response, we are missing large numbers of women who are suffering violence globally. And finally, we now have good evidence that violence is preventable. So just from the perspective of someone who's been working in the violence prevention field for many years, where do I think we are now in terms of our achievements in the field? Well, I think we now have a fairly good understanding of the drivers of violence against women. There's now international recognition of violence as a human rights abuse and a growing evidence base to show that violence against women is preventable and prevention is possible. I think we also have some quite good information on how programs can be successful and what it takes to make successful programs that are really sort of transformative of those behaviors and social norms that Wendy was talking about earlier. We also now have violence against women very clearly on both the international development agendas and the security agenda. So for example, with UN security resolutions on this area as well. And if we look particularly in the last decade, we can see that there's been an increase in policies around the globe, new laws to try to prevent and respond to violence against women, and quite a significant increase of funding on violence against women, particularly from the development sector. And I also think that we have growing expertise and knowledge sharing on this agenda. At my university at Sussex, we run a degree now on gender violence and conflict, and we have many young people now turning to this as an area of specialism. So this is very much an area where we have growing expertise now. However, I do think we have some challenges as well. If we look across our experience in the violence prevention field, I think we can see we've had some successful program models, but sometimes innovation has been stifled by trying to copy and paste programs that are successful from one context to another without actually innovating and having new ideas. In some cases, there's been inadequate consideration of the specific sociocultural context and how actually we need to adapt programs to specific contexts and the people living in that context. We've also got a challenge of scale. How do we reach beyond direct beneficiaries? So often some of the successful programs have been very good at changing and even changing rates of violence for those they work with directly. If it's a curriculum, for example, working with men or women or with couples, we've been very good at reducing violence amongst direct beneficiaries, but we can't train or do workshops with every single person around the world. So how do we get beyond those direct beneficiaries to diffuse these changes to wider communities and societies? I think to some extent there's been a little too much of a focus on individual behaviours, and we need to be looking much more at social norms in the context of relationships of power and also structural factors that are behind violence against women. And I also think we need to think a lot more about intersectional identities and how gender and race and ethnicity and disability, for example, intersect to produce very different experiences of violence for particular groups and some specific vulnerabilities. And finally, I think we need to pay greater attention to knowledge and experience from the global south. It's been a field quite dominated by knowledge from the global north, but there are many ideas and practices coming from global south countries, which we now need to also be paying more attention to in the field. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Aijamal, who is going to talk more about how our experience of the design process can help to meet some of these challenges. So over to you, Aijamal.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's so nice to be here and present our reflections on the design challenge. Indeed, the design challenge has clearly shown us that the human-centered design can be beneficial in many ways for the development sector. Well, the process shows us that and drives a clear focus on the user, on the target, by putting the person that we are serving just in the center of the process, to allow us to empathize with their experiences and needs, understand their motivations, ideas, and design the solutions and interventions accordingly. It also encourages us an open, outside the box of kind of mindset, meaning that any idea can be a good idea, allowing us to generate a diverse range of creative ideas. The process provides us with an opportunity to rapidly bring ideas to life through visualization and prototyping, the skills that designers have really brought to us, and that was very valuable. It allows us to embrace and learn from failure. It's okay to take risks. It's okay to test, to try, to learn, to change, and then again, try again. So we should just let the creativity to flow. We should allow us to a space to create and be free in that sense. Also, a very important thing that we learned is also like the faith in the process, so that we should trust the process. And sometimes we don't know where it will take us, but as long as we follow the process and try to listen to our users and try to empathize with them, we will get there. It was very remarkable to work with young designers and other specialists from different fields and from different countries, because they brought some totally new and sometimes very different perspectives as well. So we also learned that inclusive process has brought a lot of unconventional ideas. We were pleased to have to hear lots of ideas and perspectives from young people across the region, but also outside of our region. We also looked at the benefits that this challenge has brought to us and also to the designers. For example, if I may ask for the next slide, please. We learned, so this is the ideation process. I wanted to show that how we have ideated during the process. It was just pouring ideas and innovations. So if we go to the next slide, I would like to look at the broader benefits that this challenge has brought to both gender and violence against women experts, but also to the design community. Of course, for us, we learned a totally different approach to designing programs. And we will be using the human-centered design now in planning our programs, planning our campaigns, designing our communications activations, even in partnership building. It's good to also understand and use the human-centered design when we identify our partners. We learned, of course, new approaches and new tools to understand our beneficiaries better through empathy mapping, through building personas, through storyboarding. And we forged some different and amazing partnerships with people outside of our own sector. From what we heard from our participants through surveys and through our interactions, the design challenge was transformational for many of them. Some even described it as a life-changing process. They told us that they were able to learn more about violence against women in depth. We saw how participants were able to reflect on gender and power relations and their own behaviors as well during the process. Some of our participants had personal experiences of violence, and they were drawn to this challenge because of that. And for them, it was an opportunity to reflect on their experiences, to talk to experts, and to get a support from the counselor that we had on standby. But most importantly, I think we were able to build a community, a family, and we were able to come up with new supporters, with young ambassadors of gender equality and justice, who we hope and who we are positive that they will take this knowledge and experience to their communities, families, in their work. So we just wanted to acknowledge some of our participants, basically all of our participants who brought us lots of ideas and innovations. And we are looking forward to the next phases of our design challenge, which will be about prototyping and testing. And we are very much excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay and Ijamal, for bringing us these insights from the experience of the design challenge. And I think what resonated for me from what you presented is the idea of the faith in the process and the optimism that our colleagues from the design community brought. I mean, there was really a strong sense of success, a really strong sense of optimism that really was woven throughout the process. And I think that was a really strong motivator, and it brought a sense of coherence to the overall challenge. So thank you for bringing us those reflections. So what I'd like to do now is bring in a perspective of a design challenge participant. There were, as we've told you already, more than 100 participants from all parts of the world. As Winnie remarked, we were working in shifts of 24 hours, really based on people's time zones, people working wherever they are, and just continuously having a movement in this process. And these participants really brought a sense of passion and creativity, which really was the engine behind the process. So I'm pleased to introduce to you today Neha Mann. Neha is a design researcher turned UX designer who has a vested interest in women's health and rights. She's worked on processes across healthcare to education technology in India, and now she works at Microsoft. Neha, we're so pleased to welcome you to share your experiences with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Before I even begin, I just really want to say I'm truly so grateful to be here alongside people who I look up to and sharing my perspective out of hundreds of participants who honestly I just grew to admire in a matter of 2 weeks of the challenge. So I'm here today to share my experience as a participant in the challenge and also as a designer who has worked towards women's health and human rights issues in the past. I just want to begin by sharing why I joined the challenge in the first place. So actually my faculty and mentor from my master's program forwarded me this email from WDO, and I of course said, yes, this is exactly the kind of thing I love to do, applying my design skills to issues that matter to me. And having worked in this field a little bit back in India, I knew that I could probably bring a valuable perspective. So I'll be the one to discuss how it actually was. And I think I'll be presenting it from my perspective. So it'll be more focused on my experience within my team. There were about, I think, something like 100 or 120 participants in total, and we were split into 6 teams, working towards 6 different nuanced goals. My team was these 20 incredible individuals from 12 countries. So the star marked people were actually the facilitators who drove the challenge. We were almost all designers, but with a very varied mix of disciplines within design. So in order to start to unravel this really complex issue of violence against women, we began by deconstructing the given challenge statement. So our challenge statement was, how can we influence parents to raise children to reject harmful gender stereotypes and violence? So right out of the bat, I thought that this lens on addressing the issue was really successful in that it was targeted at generational change. And like it was brought up in Lindsay's presentation as well, that violence really is a series of events and it's a generational problem, and it needs to be addressed at many different levels. So through this exercise of deconstructing, we just kind of broke down what we already knew and how we felt about the topic. So next thing is what I call the learn stage, where we started to question who these main actors are, who are the stakeholders, and we started to document what they say, think, or feel. And we did that with empathy maps, and we made quite a few of them because we were just kind of trying to expand what we know so far. Then we moved on to further sketch their personas, and this we did by describing their demographics, or also the one thing we really wanted to do here was to make sure to see them as dimensional beings. So it was really like, even if we were building the perpetrator's persona, we made an effort to be mindful that harm may be situational and one doesn't have to be inherently evil to do that. So then we moved on to mapping their day-to-day life in order to understand what are these series of events that lead up to violence. Here, just as a note, it was good and bad that almost all the participants in the group actually had experienced violence in their life or worked with people who had. So even though this is a very sad reality, it brought truth to our hypothetical mapping. So at this point, we were kind of at the midpoint of the challenge, and we redefined our problem statement. So I have quite a few things to say within this slide, but I just want to, so yeah, we redefined our problem statement to include main community decision makers. And I think that's a really interesting point, because this was brought in due to the unique insights of participants from the Pacific Islands. They said that there is a chief in the village who has a final word on a lot of decisions. So this was also corroborated by a few Indian participants who said the religious leaders can actually influence very heavily family decision making. So the other thing I wanted to say here, that up until this stage and even later, we were backed up by, and everything we were working on was substantiated by regular trainings and teachings from subject matter experts from WDO as well as UN Women, and leaders like Lindsay as well. So even participants who were new to this type of process or this type of design research work were feeling more and more comfortable with it. At this stage, we also started to draw from existing literature. So we started looking at other fields such as sociology or marketing to kind of, give a backbone of this framework exists and we could probably apply to our work. But we were also careful about not copy pasting, as Lindsay said. So we were trying to kind of adapt and see whether or not this works for us. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back right here. So I'm sorry, yeah, here. So with this like level of support, we were really enthusiastic and all the teams together made hundreds of ideas. I don't think we have a final count, but this stage was really about the volume of ideas we can create. But towards the final stage, when we had to present, each team presented one idea. And I would say I was genuinely amazed because this was a 2-week project. And I think our team spent 1 or 2 days maximum on this visualization. And there is the number of iterations that we still were able to do. So if you would see among the storyboards, they were handmade storyboards, but there was a fully illustrated video that we made towards the end. So there was some level of iteration and testing going on, feasibility testing going on amongst us. So overall, we found that through the whole process that Asia Pacific is a really massive and highly diverse area. It consists of urban areas, of rural areas, communities, castes, classes, languages. So each region presents a very unique challenge. So we wanted to make sure that in our proposed strategy, which I'm not going into the details of it, but we worked on how to make it scalable across regions and languages. So as a quick summary, I wanted to share my top 3 learnings from this challenge. Number 1 is that I saw how this unique collaboration utilized design, not only for creating innovative outcomes, but also as a process. So this addition of design thinking methods to address larger social issues, I believe it brought this unique perspective to the project, which could probably be lost in traditional research methods. The second, top learning for me was that wicked problems require contextual solutions. So I have a lot to explain here. I'll be quick about it. So theorists define wicked problems as complex, ever-changing, multifaceted problems. And time and again, we have seen proof that these problems require contextual solutions. By contextual here, I mean solutions that are derived, directly from understanding the user or understanding the problem statement. So they may need to be unconventional, they may need to be low resourced, but more importantly, they need to evolve with the problem. So in our proposal, we developed how the strategy or this proposal could grow from the birth of the child to adulthood. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was that I truly believe design belongs in these social spaces, as our primary principle is our focus on people. Whether it is human-centered design projects that may or may not have direct access to the user, or whether it is co-designed with the users, or it is participatory design, which considers users as the experts. Either way, design as a practice is centered around serving the user and keeping their needs in mind. So no matter what type of designer you may be, your skill set will lend value to such topics. In my work, I found it really helpful to layer my design work with proven literature and frameworks from disciplines like anthropology or sociology, kind of as a backbone to my design work. When I'm operating within these proven frameworks, I think we can apply design to other verticals, such as policy making, healthcare, education, and that could really build the bridge for more of such crossover work. So with that, I'll be signing off. I'm once again super thankful to everyone who participated. I'm most happy about the fact that this is actually going to be taken forward and that these ideas are being evaluated for feasibility. If you want to see my work, that's my website. I'm Neha and I'm wearing orange in solidarity with the cause of violence against women.
Thank you, Neha. So good to hear from you and for you to share this perspective with us. Thank you for being with us. I'm gonna return to you in a moment and invite Lindsay and Ijamal to join us for a conversation with you to reflect on sort of the different angles of all of our participation in this process. But before I do that, or as we bring them back, I wanted to just reflect on one thing you said related to how a number of participants in your group and indeed many of the groups, in fact, had firsthand experience with violence, whether as a survivor themselves or knowing someone close to them who'd experienced violence. And I think that that's a really key feature of this experience, right? It really brought out a lot of intensity. You acknowledge the fact that this really brought out a truth, right, to the conversation, and it helped us stay true to what we understand the dynamics of violence to be and the needs of survivors. So I think I really appreciate that you brought that forward. I think those who are listening today may be wondering about that, and unfortunately we had anticipated that, knowing that there was a large group of young, mostly female participants in this group. And so we did build in a support system for those who might need to seek support from a counselor, a trained counselor who was on standby for those who needed it. And in fact, and she did receive a number of phone calls, and there were a number of supportive actions taken around that. So I think it's just good to acknowledge that for those that might be wondering about that particular angle, and I'm really glad that you raised that. So I want to now invite Lindsay and Ijamal to come back and for us to have a quick conversation with Neha about some of your reflections now that the design has moved on to the next phase. And so I want to turn first to Ijamal and ask Ijamal, looking back on the design challenge, what were some of the lessons that have stayed with you from this experience and that you're carrying forward with you now as we move ahead?
Thank you so much, Melissa, for this question. Well, I think there are several lessons. Maybe I'll just put out some here. Well, first of all, we learned that the human-centered design can be used on complex issues and on invisible issues like attitudes, norms, and beliefs, not only on tangible issues. Some participants who were part of our design challenge, they worked for businesses and they were developing solutions for businesses. And for them, this was an opportunity to develop for social impact issues. And that was an eye-opening thing for them, I think. Since our design challenge was during COVID pandemic and it was in August, we learned that it is possible to collaborate virtually. It's good, and we can still do it across all these time zones from all parts of the world. And it is possible because there are lots of collaborative tools there, and that was absolutely possible. It was also wonderful to work on these issues with people from outside of our sector. We tend to work with people who are already converted, who are already part of this solution, who are aware of these issues. And for us, it was good to hear from the perspectives who have never heard of this issue or who have never been exposed to this issue. So that was a very key lesson. And bringing people who are from diverse backgrounds, from different age, ethnicity, different groups, this brought a lot of, I think, ideas and solutions as well. And the final lesson is also for different actors who have joined this design challenge is to be on the same page, to learn in advance. For example, for design participants, it would be good to learn more about violence against women, gender and power relations, and for social impact organizations, more about the process. So these are some of the lessons that we learned.
Thank you so much, Ijamal. And it's true, when we started this partnership with WDO, the World Design Organization, we really were asking ourselves, how can we expand, our field of vision? How can we talk to people that we're not usually talking to? And that was one of the things that really excited us about this opportunity to collaborate. So it's really brought us a lot of exciting new ideas. So thanks for raising that. So now I want to turn to Lindsay and ask you the following. So given your experience in this area, you've been working on violence for so long, Lindsay, what would you recommend to young innovators and design professionals who are eager to use their talent to address violence against women and girls? We are aware that among listeners in today's event, there are many motivated young people who are eager to address this issue, to work on ending violence against women. What do you think are actions that can be taken by the participants today? Over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Melissa. I mean, first, just to say it was amazing in this process, and it is amazing that so many young designers around the world want to apply their design skills for social justice and well-being issues. I think that's just fantastic. In terms of actions, I guess the first would be kind of learn and keep learning. Violence is a complex human issue. It's around power relations, gender, other identities. So to keep learning about the causes and consequences of violence and how they're shaped in each context, but particularly through, not just by reading books, but by listening. I think listening to people, empathizing with people, is something designers already do well, and to keep doing more of that and really understanding violence and people's experience. Secondly, I would say it's important for all of us working in this field to engage in what I'd call critical self-reflection. I think each of us needs to basically be humble, be thinking about our own uses and experiences of power and privilege, our own beliefs on gender and other issues, our own behaviours. And I think that critical self-reflection is a key part of working in this field. And then thirdly, I think it's about solidarity. I think it's about reaching out, building your networks, both locally in your own context and globally. And that's both about sharing experiences and ideas, because it's brilliant when minds work together in a team. I'm a great believer in teams, especially cross-national teams, but also to get support and to be in a safe space. This is a sensitive issue. It's upsetting. Many people have had this experience or know someone with this experience. So that those networks are also critical for being in a safe space as well. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. So Neha, I'd like to turn to you and ask what messages you might have for designers who are interested in perhaps exploring how they might apply their skill set to this particular issue or similar issues. You've talked a little bit about what you've learned and how you might be approaching your work differently. If you could tell us a bit more about that. Thanks, Neha.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one fixed answer to that, but I can share what has worked for me. I'm still a very young designer. I'm always learning still, but I think one thing that has worked for me is kind of the layering of these sociological frameworks on top of design work, kind of using those as a backbone to operate in. I think that has helped me. It's switching from the lens of being problem oriented, or sorry, like solution oriented, to being action oriented. So for example, not thinking about like making sure that your problem statement is a problem statement and not actually secretly a solution statement. So not saying that I want to make a comfortable chair, but saying how do I seat people comfortably. So maybe you still end up making a chair, but it's shifting that lens onto understanding what comfort is, what seating is. So I think in the process, even if you arrive at the same solution, in the process you can learn so much more, especially when working on issues which might be new to us. So I didn't know the depth of this issue, for example, but once I started to just in order to find that action, when I started to understand it did bring in a lot of critical assessment of myself as a designer, as a person as well. And I think that's a very valuable thing. And then one more thing I would just say to designers who would probably be branching out into more social design is that, and this is controversial in design to say this, but it's that volunteer. I know that designers, there's a huge movement to say that we should not be working for free. Some of the best things in my life have come from volunteering. So if you can volunteer and spend your time exploring these things which which may end up becoming those main professions for you. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Neha. That's great. I think that you've all addressed some really central dynamics of this challenge. You spoke about, really staying with a true question, really not really trying to assume that we have the answer already, but really sticking with the sort of deconstructed question. What is it that we can really do to change behavior and change social norms, not really arrive we were very careful to not sort of predict the solution that might come out of this process. And Lindsay, you also spoke about the importance of critical self-reflection. And I know that there was a lot of discomfort in this process, and we had to stay with that. We had to be honest about that. And I think that that was really partly where we derived value from this process. So thank you so much to the three of you for offering some quick insights based on that experience. So I want to now turn our attention to the experiences of some other programs and other approaches and initiatives that have gone through a similar process like this, through a human design process, human-centered design process. And so I'm really pleased to be able to share with you and to introduce you to Shreya V. Basu. She's a program associate at Safetipin, which is a social enterprise that uses data and technology to make public spaces safer and more inclusive for women. Shreya, we've invited you here to please share with us what you consider to be some of the key ingredients in Safetipin's story. And if you could please tell us a bit about the challenges and how you've approached innovative approaches to help end violence against women and girls. So over to you, Shreya.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm just trying to share my presentation. I think I'm facing some issues. Maybe could you just share it, Natalie? Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so hi, I'm Shreya from Safetipin. You can go to the next slide. So Safetipin is a technology platform and a set of apps that works to make public spaces safer and more inclusive for women. We do this by conducting safety audits, and this is a tool to basically assess a public space. Can you just press next 2 more times? Thank you. Yeah. So through our app, a user can do a safety audit in under a minute by rating these 9 parameters. And then we collate this information for cities, we analyze it, and provide recommendations to governments and local authorities for actionable change. Now coming to our main product, which is the My Safetipin app. It was designed and created for crowdsourced data. And our intention was always to provide free data to users so that they could make safe decisions for their mobility. The app currently has over 120,000 downloads and is present in 60 cities globally. Could you just press the next slide? Yeah. Can we go to the, yeah, and one more click. So I want to take you through the journey of our app actually. And we started 7 years ago. And this was the first screen that we had. When we started out, we wanted to do everything. We wanted users to do an audit. We wanted them to report harassment and a hazard, mark a place, view the details, be tracked, and honestly, so much more. There were a lot of thoughts and we put it all into one app. Early into being launched, we realized that this wasn't working. The thought might have been great, but the execution at the time wasn't. So we came up with version 2. Could you just press next? Yeah. This version was, a little easier on the eye, easier to navigate, and a little bit more organized. We, looked at the previous app and we took the best elements, or at least what we at that time believed were the best elements of the previous app and put it into this one. But there was still something missing. There was still something that wasn't there, and that's when we came up with the third version of our app. Could you just click on the screen? Yeah. So in this one, as you can see, the first big change is the color. So the reason we had actually picked red before was because, red is the color of danger. And we were saying that we are preventing that and we're working towards eradicating danger. But I think over discussions, we realized that since we're not a response app and we're a prevention app, it's important to make people feel comfortable and calm while using the app, to be able to report this or even give information to make their city safer. So we moved to this new color palette. We also refined the design a little bit more, changed the font, revised the icons, and they may seem like small things, but they actually made a huge impact, because when users started using this version of the app, they were actually able to understand the flow of the app within a very short span of time, which was very nice to see. In this version, we also finalized our features. A few of them were new and a few were taken from before, but fixed. Can you just press next? Yeah, and once more. So the four features that we have now, the first is the safety audit. As I've already explained, that is how you can contribute as a user to the safety of your city. The second one was tracking. So basically, if you are traveling alone and are feeling unsafe or uncomfortable, you can request someone to track you. And you're very mindful of this right at the beginning, because in a country like India, there's a lot of cases of stalking and moral policing with tracking apps. So the control of tracking lies with the user entirely. Nobody can send you a request to track you or anything like that. It is based on how you are feeling in a space, and you can send it. The third feature is the safest route. So on Google Maps right now, if you want to go somewhere and you look for directions, they give you 3 routes and you choose the fastest one. But as a woman traveling alone at night, the fastest route isn't always the safest, because they'll take you through narrower lanes and maybe unwell lit areas. And so what we do is we overlay our safety data on these routes and provide you with the safest route you can take. And our fourth and newest feature is find support. This was actually created during the pandemic because of the increased cases of violence against women. So currently the feature is only in India, and with the tap of one button, you can find all the centers of help near you in your state. This includes police stations with women units, one-stop crisis centers, support centers, and shelters. So these were our 4 features, but I think the big issue still is, how do you design for people? So can you just go to the next slide? So I really like this quote because I am an engineer, and I also have this habit of looking at things in a very logical way. But I think working on products, which I have been doing since I started working, I've learned a lot about how to design it for people. And I'd actually like to share a small example of how Safetipin came to be a prevention app. In 2012, there was actually a case in India where a young medical student who was out at night with her boyfriend was raped and murdered. And this actually brought the entire country out onto the streets to protest for justice. Another thing that happened was the rise of emergency apps. They wanted women to be able to report or call someone if they were feeling unsafe. But according to me, there was a fundamental flaw there, and it was that these apps were clearly created by people who didn't ask women what they wanted for their safety. Because I'm a woman, I live in India, and I have faced street harassment on more occasions than I can count, and I've never felt like taking out my phone, opening an app, and calling someone or pressing a button. The response time isn't fast enough. And I think this comes to the point that Lindsay also made, that prevention is very different from response. So Safetipin started around the same time, looking at, instead of fixing the problem, how can we actually address spaces and make them safer so these problems don't exist anymore? And I think that's why I really like this quote. And prevention is, of course, a much longer process, which systematically and structurally addresses a city and its people, and not just looking at curing the problem once it's occurred. And it's important to understand who you're building it for. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So I think a few of our challenges which I would like to discuss here. I think the first big one is what comes next. What happens after you've designed it, after you've developed it? How do you actually get people to use it? And I think anyone working on an app will agree that the tool we use to measure it is downloads. How many downloads does an app have? And that's the criteria for saying how good it is. I've actually changed my point of view on that, because I think downloads are easy enough to get. You can even pay for it and get people to download your app. But the big question is, how do you get active users? How do you get people to recurringly use it, to come back to the app and to actually contribute to making their city safer? So now that I've changed my goal, I think my process will also change in how I try to achieve it. Of course, the problem of getting users is always going to be ongoing, and we continuously develop and design to get to that point. I think another challenge is with technology. We're using technology to fix or at least address a social issue. And we have to understand that technology is only an enabler for change. It cannot be the change itself. And a product like an app is much more than just its design and development. It's about the people who use it and are impacted by it. And I would now like to talk a little bit about the impact of Safetipin in our work. Could you just go to the next slide? Yeah, so I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but just to tell you in short, Safetipin works with governments, NGOs, researchers, development banks, global agendas, and honestly, a lot more. And I think one of our projects which has really worked successfully was in Delhi. We worked with the government in 2016 to collect data around the city, and we identified over 7,000 dark spots, which are either places where there is no lighting infrastructure or where the lighting infrastructure is non-functional. We gave this data to them, and in 2019, they reached out to us again to conduct the data collection study again, and we found that the points had reduced to almost 2,500. So they had used the data to actually light up the streets of Delhi. Now, I'm not saying that just by lighting it up, it is completely safe for women now, of course not, but it is starting the process. Well-lit streets is step one, at least according to us, to fix these problems. We've also worked in Bogota, in Hanoi, in many different countries and cities across the world actually. And it's been really interesting to see the impact. In Bogota, we actually worked to get women out, cycling more. In Hanoi, we worked with the metro line that was coming up. So Safetipin actually uses various tools for data collection, but we don't forget the power of the people using it, the on-ground assistance we get from grassroots organizations, and the motivation behind our work. We're trying to build a world where everyone can move around without fear, especially women. And I think it's an ongoing process and we're still learning. And I'm really happy to share this with you. So thank you. You can just go to the next slide. And I'm so sorry for the little technical difficulty that I faced.
Thank you so much, Shreya, for sharing this story with us, the story of Safetipin, in just a few minutes. I know it's a much longer story to tell, but we really appreciate you giving us a taste of that. I mean, we're very familiar with Safetipin. Safetipin has become quite well known, not just in this region as globally, as you've pointed out, for really trying to test and innovate ways to get crowdsourced data, to crowdsource solutions, to and to open up conversations. I think that's one of the important values that you're bringing, is you're engaging local governments, municipalities, to open up a different kind of discussion about the public spaces that we are creating, that we inhabit, and that women experience, right? You're bringing the data, you're bringing the perspectives of women to these policymakers and decision makers. So not just to think about the infrastructure side of thing, as you pointed out, lighting is easy to address. What is harder to address are some of those discriminatory norms and frankly, yeah, the views about women, the sexual harassment that women experience, and to do the hard work, right, to build a more gender equitable society. But as you point out, this is an opening. This does create new conversations, and people do like to have different types of data to look at that they can, to build those conversations around. So I think that what you've shared is really valuable. And I know from a number of the Safe Cities programs that we've worked with, that they've really valued what Safetipin has brought. So thank you for being with us and sharing this. So I'd like to now introduce another two presenters who have joined our session today with a similar, maybe a trajectory, a story to tell. So we've invited a couple practitioners from the International Rescue Committee, and they're join us today to talk about design's impact on addressing gender-based violence and present with us a program called Becoming One. So I'm pleased to introduce Rachel Lehrer. She's the Associate Director of Design and Innovation at the Airbell Impact Lab, which is the International Rescue Committee Research and Innovation Team. She leads global multidisciplinary teams to design and test life-changing scalable solutions for those affected by conflict and disaster. Rachel's joined by Jackie Namubiro, a research associate at Innovations for Poverty with the Becoming One program. Jackie managed the design research for the pilot and the RCT, the random control trial, as well as on the ground implementation and operations for Becoming One. So we hand the floor over to you, Rachel and Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Like you've already mentioned, I'm Jackie Nambiru. I work with IPA, Innovations for Poverty Action, the Uganda office. And I'm a researcher with experience in violence prevention and impact evaluation.
And I'm Rachel Lair, a design director at AirBell, the International Rescue Committee's Impact Lab. We're one of the biggest R&D units working in humanitarian aid, and Jackie and I are part of a team that created Becoming One, a couples counseling program proven to prevent violence and delivered through the Christian Church. So just to start talking about the overall goal, our organizations collaborated to prevent intimate partner violence using design and evidence to inspire, and then using randomized control trials to test and evaluate the impact of the program. We began doing design research to understand how people were already solving problems in their relationships, right? This is not a new problem. There are existing solutions. Now, in Uganda, half of the women between the ages of 19 and 49 have experienced violence in their most intimate relationships. And we knew we needed to, in addition to addressing the behaviors, as Lindsay mentioned, we also needed to address the acceptance and justification of violence against women. And as organizations that work in low resource regions, we needed to leverage existing systems of power and influence to ensure that cost and desirability weren't a barrier to scale. We quickly met men and women, various pastors who spent a lot of time mediating violence that were in their congregations and communities. They offered premarital classes to congregants, and they would try their best to give practical support. But often they could only offer things like prayers. Understanding the huge potential in working together and working within already established and respected systems and with leaders who were trusted, connecting with people's existing values and solutions, then laid out a threefold challenge for us. So one, we needed to get men interested in reducing violence, and we knew that the Bible and the church were key to motivating that change. Two, we needed very strong faith leader engagement and buy-in. And to do that, we needed to save them time. We needed to empower couples to solve the conflict that usually ended up at the faith leader's doorstep. And we needed to build their reputation in the community. In short, leveraging the volunteerism that was so common and is such a core value of the church meant that the experience had to be incredibly rewarding and easy for them to engage in. And then third, finally, for the church and our implementation partners who ended up being World Vision, were core partners in this project, it needed to deliver impact cost effectively, right? So the outcomes needed to be achieved.
Thank you, Rachel. Coming from a strong quantitative research background, doing design research was new for me and more qualitative, whereas quantitative research methods allow for testing a hypothesis systematically by collecting and analyzing data. Design research is rich in exploring ideas, opinions, and experiences to inform and respond to design challenges. So I was able to embrace this quantitative research background, learn design research, and thus able to coordinate and translate numerous field experiences into design changes. So to do all this, we had to draw on the best methods from design and rigorous research, prototyping, and piloting. We also maintained high design standards. One, we knew that we were not who we are designing for, and we were so careful to make assumptions that are not validated by testing. We also believe that if something is not understood by the users, if something is not desirable, if something is not user-friendly, that should be our fault. It's never the user's fault. Like Al-Jamal mentioned before, we put the user at the center of the entire process. We also wanted every piece of our solution to be so easy as to require so minimum training. So our diverse and multidisciplinary team from the 3 organizations collaborated on a purely design-driven approach. We focused on the user's perspective on both the small details and the bigger picture. We created things as quickly as possible, tangible things that people could respond to, built on those and tested again with the learnings we had received. And with this, we made several design changes to the program and iterated and tested informally and through pilots. This was also made possible because there was a very strong Ugandan team on the ground in the field that was collecting data, using those learnings and designing with the users. So for the solution, together with faith leaders, the men and the women in Uganda, we designed the Becoming One program. The picture here is of a couple. The picture on the screen is of a couple who joined Becoming One. And this picture was taken during a final ceremony where the couple was taking some time to reflect on the lessons they had learned from the Becoming One sessions as they were putting a wristband on each other's hands. So that is one of the many other pictures of the couples that went through the Becoming One program. So Becoming One is a couples counseling program that is designed to bring couples together, closer to each other, and prevent violence against women, prevent intimate partner violence as well. So the program is delivered by the faith leaders who learn through videos and guide couples through a 12 engaging group sessions with illustrated workbooks. So these sessions are biblically based and incorporate several biblical principles. For example, faith leaders incorporated reflections on biblical verses that support peaceful and harmonious relationships and behavior at home. So the sessions basically taught communication skills, emotional regulation, financial transparency, shared control over the finances as well, and then sexual consent and pleasure. This unites the best, this program unites the best of the church and scientific evidence and is proven to reduce violence. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you. So to get to the impact, what impact did Becoming One have after we ran it with over 2,000 couples? Well, after sort of evaluating it with a randomized control trial, the gold standard of scientific evidence, after a year after it was actually given to people, women reported a 27% reduction in the frequency of violence, a 24% reduction in the types of violence that they experienced, and then a 39% reduction in women being threatened into sex. So Becoming One, in addition to that, in addition to the specific sort of violence outcomes, Becoming One couples reported higher levels of trust, openness, and appreciation for their partner, significantly lower levels of depression. Our research shows that through increasing the value that couples place on their relationship, Becoming One men were motivated to cede power to women. Becoming One, also in terms of its scale potential, Becoming One costs less than half of the leading violence prevention programs and takes less than 1/3 of the time. And it has potential cost recovery for churches. Becoming One's now being planned for scale with World Vision in Uganda and the Church of Uganda, which has about 11 million members. We know that the same religious values and violence exist in other regions across East Africa. And we know that Becoming One is really well positioned to transform violence in church-going couples.
Thank you, Rachel. This project brought the best design and rigorous research, bracing ethical standards and safety while also iterating quickly and using scientific evidence and qualitative insights. So we wanted to make something that people desired, that was user-friendly, that was easy to use, but we also needed to make something that could stand against the most rigorous scientific evaluation. Our team, always willing to put lived experience ahead of professional expertise, was very willing, always willing to ask why, always willing to listen, always willing to remake, always willing to create again and again. And we are thrilled to show that the results deliver on the promise of design. Its flexibility to integrate with other disciplines and its ability to tackle some of the most challenging social issues of our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie and Rachel, for this really compelling story that you've just shared with us. I really am delighted that you could bring an example about how you have successfully engaged faith communities, which are really essential in our collective journey to address violence against women. I mean, globally, this is really considered to be, one of the most important groups to be engaging. Their reach, their ability to influence people's thoughts and actions, really serving as thought leaders in many communities is so important. And I love what you said, Jackie, that this approach has united the best of church and evidence. And I think you've really given us a good example that is so user-centered. And so thank you for all those wonderful angles that you brought into this perspective. And I just want to make a quick reminder that we see that some of you are making comments in the Q&A box. We are reading those. We will come back to those. We'll have an opportunity to reflect on those in a moment. What I'm going to do next is welcome Bertrand Deron, who's the Managing Director at World Design Organization and a sustainable design advisor for more than 20 years. He eagerly advocates for design's social, environmental, and economic impacts. Over to you, Bertrand.
Thank you, Melissa. It's my great pleasure to be with you today, hearing such inspiring stories from our speakers. For a designer like me that believes in social impact of design, it is a great day. I'm pretty sure we are all enthusiastic for the next steps of the Design Challenge in 2021. And I'm pleased to have a discussion today with and a panel discussion with Winnie Kuzuma and Srinivasan, so that we can go and take a little bit more this dual perspective on what we've gone through and where we're going with the use of design to tackle such social issues. As Melissa mentioned, we're glad to take your questions in the Q&A section of the application. So we'd like now to change our focus to look at the future and talk about the role and opportunities for design to tackle large social issues such as gender-based violence. Today, we've seen how design thinking and design-centric processes have been employed in a variety of contexts to solve problems. But Srini, could you elaborate on why designers need to turn their attention to the issue of violence against women and girls, and why is there a good fit there?
Thank you, Bertrand. So we all know from historic perspective that the violence against women is a deeply rooted societal problem for centuries and centuries. So we have seen it time and again. And designers are typically, as I said earlier, they are problem solvers. If there is a problem, then designers get to the root of it. So therefore, designers have a much better perspective in solving every issue, including the violence against women. As we saw in the Safetipin, just take a small example of how to light a corner of a street in Nairobi or in New Delhi or in Nepal, right? That little thing that everybody knows, the light should be there, but then it took a designer to get to the point of informing the society or informing the city officials to make that little change. So therefore, when designers look at a problem, they don't get emotional with the essence of it, but they want to look at how can the problem be eradicated. Therefore, designers have a greater empathy in solving problems, especially in the challenge that we have seen. Number of solutions that came were not originally thought through, but it came through because designers had a deeper insight into digging into the problems. So therefore, I feel designers have a greater say, and people can change with the designer's help.
Thank you for
and
that.
Secondly, I just want to add one more thing.
Please.
It's all about communication, right? When you talk about communication, how do you make people aware of it? In today's digital era where we are living, communication with different tools or different social messaging systems, again, a human-centered approach is what the designers are doing to spread the message, which is a lot important than just physical device that can be designed as well.
Thank you for those perspectives, Srini. Now, Winnie, I'm curious to know if you had worked or interacted with designer in your career, and what fit or place do you see for designers at different stages of the UN projects around gender equality?
Thank you, Bertrand, and thank you, Srini. I have to admit, this has been deeply enlightening to me as a process of not only getting to know the World Design Organization, but also, of course, the design process and human-centered design. I am lucky enough to have a sibling, a brother, who is a designer, and he has the capacity to explain things to me in ways that help me understand. What I was able to do in this design challenge was to take that even further, of course, with the help of WDO. The question for me is not, what is the future of design in our work so much as how can I envision a world without design now? It really is integrated into some of our new DNA, just in terms of thinking, how could we do this differently? You have opened our eyes. Now, in terms of the messages that we have for our participants, people in the private sector, people who are designers, what we want to say to you is very much an echo of what Neha raised, and that is, please lend your know-how, lend your creativity to especially women's organizations at the ground level. We need you to be part of the solution. Violence against women is a society-wide problem. We need an all-of-society approach to this. Donate your business services. And yes, this does mean volunteering. We need to understand that it is together that we need to move forward. And when you design a product, that you take into account, please, gender and violence against women. We need more people on board. Now, at large, I also want to end by saying, if someone you know is a victim of violence, please take this person seriously. Offer support, listen, understand that it is your responsibility to respond. Understand that it is also your responsibility to be part of the solution. And that means helping on the prevention. We need to stop this now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winnie, for those touching words. I think you mentioned you've learned from the design process. I think the designers were really moved and touched by the issue that they've been working on. And I think they won't be doing their work in the same way in the future. Now, a quick question for both of you. Early in 2020, we were planning on going to Nepal to do this design challenge because it's the way WDO have been doing those interdesign projects, bringing designers on the field because they need to do ethnography to learn to know the people, to understand the issues that they're going to be working on to be able to drive innovative solution. But in the current context of the pandemic, which has even worsened the situation of violence against women, it was impossible for us to join and be physically together to work on this issue. is there any silver lining, if any, that this situation of having to work virtually has brought to the design challenge and to the experience and outcomes?
Yeah, I can go first, Vinny. As we saw, yep, go ahead,
Please.
Vinny. Go ahead.
Srini, after you.
As we saw during the challenge, we quickly adopted. We saw that, the world is going to end because we are not going to be able to travel. And then we quickly realized there are other ways to live, other ways to breathe and stay alive. And one of them was, we said, why not we look into a digital medium of, collaborating with people. And this needed a lot of facilitated process. And we needed to go to people to look at things that they were not normally looking. Even for a world design organization, we need to adopt ourselves into using tools that will help us collaborate. And Zoom was one of them. Now we cannot live without Zoom on a daily basis. But that's what we realized, in a quick 1 week period, saying, how do we communicate with each other? Because communication is a lifeline for all of us on a daily basis. And the digital tools we found, like the Miro or the Mural, and then we actually, I think I must tell that, even during the challenge, it was a well-crafted, well-thought-out, structured facilitation process between the WTO and the UN Women team that really helped us overcome the barrier of being in physical. Of course, it would be great to be in Nepal. We regret the opportunity that we missed being there, but certainly we are now able to talk to people. We don't feel any alien to any one of us, that we've been talking for the last, 6 to 8 months. So we feel much more closer. My personal feeling is we have become much more closer through these intense digital communication channels that you have adopted. So it was not a problem at all in communicating and expressing our opinions. We also goaded the participants to think very deeply, which probably we would not have done because there's a 1 day or 2 day workshop, but this was much, much more deeper.
Thank you, Srini.
Vinny?
Well, I have to say that the openness that WDO colleagues like yourselves showed to the very difficult issues, thinking critically about entitlement and what that means in our very own selves, how we have to take a look at the assumptions that privilege brings us. We had very difficult conversations with WDO colleagues over the summer, and through that, what came out was enormous trust. I think that what I see ahead, Bertrand, is possibilities.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I see we have lots of questions coming in. I'd also like to ask our participants to maybe share how they see their practice might evolve in the future so we can get a conversation going. And I'm going to give the mic back to Melissa for the Q&A part of our World Design Talk. Thank you very much, Winnie and Srini.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you all. Thank you, Bertrand, Winnie, and Srini for those reflections. So yes, we do have a few minutes. We are conscious of the time, but we do want a chance to get to some of those questions that have been coming through the Q&A function. Some have been responded to in writing, but our colleague Natalie will share a few of those questions that we have received so that she can read them out. Natalie?
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who submitted their questions. The first one, and understandably a popular one, was to Srini to respond, and people would like to know about the actual solutions that were presented at the end of the challenge. How do people learn more? What can they expect in the short term?
Thank you, Natalie. I think I saw that everybody is very curious. One of the challenges that we have been facing during this whole year when we moved to digital is that the number of people who want to volunteer for these challenges. We've been really hard pressed to select because we are getting, like, for one of the challenges, we got 6,000 applicants saying, I am here, I want to help. Even in the case of the UN Women Challenges, we had thousands of people saying, I want to help. So I think our problem remains in seeing how best we can make them effective and how many number we need to choose. And we also look at the background very, very carefully to see what is the subject matter that they are bringing to the table. So with that having said, so we had a tough time choosing the 115, 120 participants from various parts of the globe. And then we formed the 6 teams. So I know that there were questions saying, how did you choose the questions? How did you come up with the subject matter expert in this challenge was indeed UN Women's team. They have been grappling with this problem for several decades. And then we actually had Winnie and Melissa and Ijamal and the other people and Lindsay and other people who are not on this call spent countless number of hours to frame what is the most important questions that they are trying to solve as they do as a common problem of solving violence against women and girls. And then the challenge, okay, and then the challenge, the second part of the question. So what next, right? People always want to see where is the end result? Okay, this is just the beginning of a journey. I don't have a destination yet because the journey is a long journey and it's not going to end. If we have been facing this problem in our society for centuries, it won't go away in 2 weeks. We all know that very clearly. So, but currently, UN Women team and the WTO team is looking at all those wonderful solutions. It's always easy to come with a solution on paper or on our design sprints that we call. But at the end of the day, we need to find somebody who can take this solution and implement. We want to find implementable solutions that can be implemented in several cities across the globe for effectiveness. And that's what we are currently evaluating. And it's not an easy task. We are looking at, what would be done. So please look at the UN Women as well as WTO website. So we will be coming out with some sort of a next step. And if there is an opportunity for you to participate, I welcome you to start getting in touch with us and we will see how we go to the next steps. Please be on the watch out. It's not easy. It's not going to come tomorrow, but certainly sometime in 2021, we will have the opportunity to bring all of you back together and more people who are not on this call to come back together and work together. We need, as Neha and Shreya, everybody said, we need more people. We need people to volunteer their time. Somebody was asking, is it a full time? Unfortunately, it is not full time, but people are spending more than full time. That's what is the situation out here. Thank you.
Thank you, Srini. We have a question for Neha and Lindsay. People are curious to know about, dealing with the diversity factor in answering some of the problems or the challenge statements, and also a question about collaboration tools. So we did answer the questions in the Q&A about, whiteboarding tools and communication tools, but what about how were you able to collaborate with this group that you had never actually met?
Yeah, I can speak about it a bit. Yeah, I think about collaborating with a group who we had never met, it was never really a challenge. I think from day one, we had, ice-breaking sessions, and how we started with deconstructing what we already knew. So we already knew somewhat, where we're coming from, and that was never a challenge. But about diversity, I think we, like I said, our group had people from 12 countries, but also within those 12 countries, people had, worked across different regions. So there was representation from, for example, and very strong representation from the Pacific Islands. And that's a perspective I personally did not know. And, I've worked in this space a little bit, and I personally did not know that. So there was a perspective from Fiji or Vanuatu or Timor-Leste, which, if those people were not in our group, we would have missed out on. And it was so specific because the type of communities there are completely different from what we would observe in, for example, Delhi. So we, in our group, we had a lot of back and forth about, people would shut down an idea saying that this would never fly in this place, this would never fly in this place. So we were kind of really trying to make sure that we're designing for, or we're contextualizing what we're making for different parts of the world, parts of Asia Pacific. But like, for example, one of the things we did was in the proposal that we made, it could be executed as a puppet show, but also as a mobile app, also as a book. The book could have any different language, but it could also simply be illustrated. So just, carefully looking at some of these nuances, I think at a very early stage really helped us. I also really want to mention one thing which we did not pay attention to and the group has been talking about it on Facebook ever since, is we operated through a very binary lens, and we were not looking at couples other than heterosexual, or what about nuclear families, what about transgender, intersectional issues that may prop up. So that is something we didn't do, and I definitely, if we did it again, I would change that.
Just I haven't got much to add to Neha, but I guess, a lot of this was about quite rapid relationship building between team members. And we did a few exercises at the beginning, as Neha said, and one of those was very much to get everyone to look at sort of, what they could bring to the group and to kind of articulate that. And we use the interactive tools for that, but also kind of what they wanted to learn as well. So thinking that all of us were sort of learners as well as people who could give to this challenge. And then really just establishing ground rules, setting values as facilitators, and then saying to people that we need to be able to challenge each other as well, gently. So again, it's how do you challenge the idea, not kind of challenge the person. Some of these basic rules around working together in teams, we did spend quite a long time establishing relationships at the beginning in that way. Thanks.
We're just going to have one more question. Thank you both, just because of time, and this one is for Rachel and Jackie. We have a question about how the program Becoming One might apply to non-faith communities. And I think that it's so interesting because one of the themes that we elaborated on was about, parents, guardians, leaders in the community. So maybe one of you or both of you could respond to that one.
Jackie, should I go first?
Yes.
So, this gets back to, I think, one of the pain points of human-centered design and also one of its great assets. The challenge with human-centered design is if you focus on a target user group, you're gonna sometimes have a problem sort of taking it to other places, right? Because you've sort of custom designed this perfect solution for this subset of people. Thankfully, over 80% of Ugandans report going to church every week. So this particular subset of the population of couples, as people noted, like heteronormative couples who are going to church, is still a huge portion of the population, even when we slice off the Anglican Church of Uganda. It's still an enormous sort of quote unquote market opportunity. I think the challenge is, this is something that I think would benefit a lot of faith communities. So we are World Vision, although it's largely a Christian organization, they work with Muslim faith leaders as well. And so we're thinking about a plan with them to do similar work with Muslim faith leaders, with the Quran, reinterpreting some of the Quran to be more gender equitable. So we're looking at those opportunities. But noticing that, the real sort of core value, it's been built not just for Uganda, but for a particular population in Uganda, and then looking to expand sort of in Uganda and East Africa first before moving to different faith populations. Jackie, anything to add to that, what I missed?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. So I was privileged to manage the on-ground implementation of the Becoming One program. And we did give the faith leaders the liberty of recruiting the couples. And some cases, the faith leaders really had a small population and they were free to recruit any other couples that could be their friends. And a very few couples that were recruited were actually Muslim. And as much as Becoming One is grounded in biblical principles, it explicitly talks about themes that affect couples, Muslim or Christian or non-Christian. So I just wanted to point out it's not yet proven, we've not yet tested it out explicitly with the non-Christian population, but from the testimonies we had from a few, again, I'm saying a very few percentage of the non-Christian community, it was very applicable to them as well. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Melissa?
Thank you, Jackie, Rachel, Lindsay, all of you Neha, all of you who shared in response to those comments and questions we received. We're going to move to close. I want to thank all of you who've participated in today's session. And I want to say on behalf of the organizers of today's event, UN Women and the World Design Organization, an enormous thank you for all of you who've joined us, and what we hope was a conversation that will spark interest in how we can open up possibilities to solve social problems through new lenses. We've all felt the excitement that comes from crossing boundaries of professional specialization or disciplines and reaching beyond the usual suspects that we engage with on a regular basis. We found a new level of energy and inspiration by exploring design thinking with a problem the size of ending violence against women and girls. We look forward to writing the next chapter of this story in the coming months and to revisiting this topic with colleagues across disciplines in 2021. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to our next exchange. Wishing you a good evening and day wherever you are.